The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his red ceremonial uniform for what he believed would be another routine day of royal duty. At 52 years old, James had served as a royal guard for over 20 years, standing motionless for hours while tourists snapped photos and dignitaries passed by. His weathered face bore the marks of countless days spent outdoors, and his eyes held the steady gaze of a man who had dedicated his life to protecting the royal family. James came from a military family where service was not just a job but a calling, passed down through generations. His father had served in the Royal Navy, his grandfather in the Army during World War II. When James was young, he dreamed of nothing more than wearing the iconic red tunic and bearskin hat, standing guard at one of the royal residences. That dream had sustained him through rigorous training, sleepless nights, and personal sacrifices that came with such a demanding role. On this particular Tuesday morning, something felt different. James noticed an unusual energy in the castle as staff members hurried about with more purpose than usual. Kitchen workers carried extra supplies, housekeepers polished already spotless surfaces, and security personnel conducted additional sweeps of the grounds. The head of palace security had mentioned that Prince George would be visiting with his parents for a special ceremony, but James had guarded many royal events before. This should have been just another day. As James took his position at the main entrance, he reflected on the changes he had witnessed during his service. He had watched Prince William grow from a young man into a devoted father and future king. He had been present during moments of great celebration and profound sorrow within the royal family. Each day brought its own challenges, but James had always found purpose in his role as a protector and symbol of British tradition. The weight of his ceremonial sword at his side and the familiar feel of his rifle reminded James of the trust placed in him. Tourists would often try to make him smile or move, not understanding that his stillness was not just tradition but a mark of respect and professionalism. Children would wave excitedly, adults would pose for photos, but James remained focused on his duty, always scanning for any potential threat while maintaining the dignified presence expected of a royal guard. What James did not know was that this day would challenge everything he thought he understood about duty, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. Hidden beneath the routine preparations was a story that would soon unfold, involving a young prince's remarkable understanding of human dignity and an act of kindness that would change James's life forever. As the morning progressed, James felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease. His years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about today felt significant. The conversations among staff members seemed more hushed than usual, and he caught glimpses of people glancing in his direction with expressions he could not quite interpret. Little did he know that Prince George had been observing the guards during previous visits, asking questions that revealed a wisdom beyond his years. The stage was set for an encounter that would demonstrate how even the youngest members of the royal family could possess the power to see beyond tradition and recognize the humanity in those who serve them. James continued his vigil, unaware that his decades of faithful service were about to be acknowledged in a way that would touch his heart and change his perspective on what it truly means to serve with honor and dignity. Prince George stepped out of the royal car with the confident stride of a young man who had grown up surrounded by ceremony and tradition. At 11 years old, he possessed an unusual combination of natural curiosity and mature observation that often surprised the adults around him. Today he wore a smart navy blazer and perfectly pressed trousers, but his eyes sparkled with the same enthusiasm that any child might have when exploring a castle filled with history and wonder. As the prince walked toward the main entrance with his parents, Prince William and Catherine, he immediately noticed Sergeant Mitchell standing at attention. George had seen royal guards before, of course, but something about this particular guard caught his attention. Perhaps it was the way the morning light highlighted the lines around the sergeant's eyes. Or maybe it was an intuitive sense that this man had stories written in his steady stance and weathered hands. George had always been taught to respect those who served the royal family, but his understanding went deeper than mere politeness. During previous visits to royal residences, he had begun to notice things that others might overlook. He saw how guards stood for hours without moving, how their eyes remained alert even during the most routine moments, and how they maintained their dignity regardless of how tourists or visitors might behave around them. This awareness had been growing in him, fostered by conversations with his parents about duty, service, and treating all people with respect. The young prince paused slightly as they approached the entrance, causing his parents to slow their pace. Catherine noticed her son's thoughtful expression and followed his gaze to Sergeant Mitchell. She had learned to pay attention to these moments when George seemed to be processing something important. William, too, recognized the look on his son's face, the same expression he had worn as a child when something captured his imagination or stirred his sense of justice. Inside the castle, preparations were underway for a ceremony honoring long-serving staff members. The event had been planned for weeks, designed to recognize the dedication of those who worked behind the scenes to maintain the royal household. However, George had overheard conversations suggesting that not all deserving individuals would be included in the formal recognition. This knowledge troubled him, particularly when he thought about the guards who stood watch day after day, often invisible to those they protected. As the family entered the castle, George turned back to look at Sergeant Mitchell one more time. The guard remained perfectly still, his gaze focused ahead, embodying the discipline and dedication that had defined his career. In that moment, George made a decision that would soon surprise everyone around him. He had been thinking about fairness and recognition, concepts that his parents had helped him understand through their own charitable work and public service. The prince's mind began working through a plan, influenced by his growing understanding of leadership and compassion. He had watched his parents interact with people from all walks of life, always treating them with dignity and respect. He had seen how a simple gesture or word of acknowledgement could mean everything to someone who had given years of faithful service. Now, faced with Sergeant Mitchell's unwavering dedication, George felt compelled to act on these lessons. During the walk through the castle corridors, George remained quieter than usual, his young mind focused on something that seemed to transcend his years. His parents exchanged glances, recognizing that their son was processing an important realization. They had always encouraged him to think independently and to understand the responsibility that would one day be his. But they were about to witness how deeply these lessons had taken root in his character. The ceremony was scheduled to begin within the hour. But George's attention was no longer solely focused on the formal proceedings ahead. Instead, he was thinking about Sergeant Mitchell standing guard outside, and about all the other guards who performed their duties with such dedication, while receiving little recognition for their personal sacrifices. The young prince was about to demonstrate that true leadership sometimes means stepping outside, establish protocols to ensure that everyone feels valued and appreciated. The ceremony hall buzzed with quiet activity as staff members arranged chairs and prepared the stage for the recognition event. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the elegant space, and the deep red carpet seemed to absorb the nervous energy of those who would soon be honored for their years of service. Kitchen staff, housekeepers, administrative workers, and maintenance personnel had been invited to receive acknowledgement for their dedication to the royal household. Prince George sat between his parents in the front row, but his thoughts kept drifting to the guards stationed throughout the castle. He noticed that none of them were included in today's ceremony, despite their years of faithful service. The more he thought about it, the more it bothered him. These men and women stood for hours in all weather conditions, protecting his family and maintaining the dignity of royal traditions. Yet they seemed to be overlooked in formal recognitions. As the ceremony began, George listened politely as various staff members were called forward to receive certificates and words of appreciation. Each person's years of service were announced, and many had worked for the royal household for decades. The young prince applauded enthusiastically, genuinely happy for those being recognized. But he could not shake the image of Sergeant Mitchell standing motionless at his post outside during a brief intermission. George leaned over to whisper something to his mother. Catherine listened carefully, her expression shifting from curiosity to understanding as she realized what her son was suggesting. She glanced at William, who had also noticed their quiet conversation. The look that passed between the parents was one of pride mixed with concern, pride in their son's growing sense of justice, but concern about the protocol implications of what he was proposing. George's suggestion was both simple and revolutionary. He wanted to publicly acknowledge the guards who were currently on duty, particularly Sergeant Mitchell, whom he had observed that morning. The young prince argued that if they were honoring long-serving staff members, surely the guards who had protected the royal family for decades deserved recognition as well. His reasoning was logical and heartfelt, delivered with the earnestness that only a child can bring to matters of fairness. William found himself in a delicate position. As a father, he was proud of his son's empathy and developing sense of leadership. As a future king, he understood the importance of maintaining protocols and traditions. However, George's suggestion touched on something deeper, the recognition of service that often went unnoticed and unappreciated. The prince had identified a gap in their formal recognition processes that, once pointed out, seemed glaringly obvious. The young prince's persistence was gentle but unwavering. He explained that he had been watching the guards during previous visits and had noticed how dedicated they were. He mentioned specific observations, how they remained alert during long hours, how they treated visitors with respect even when those visitors were less than respectful in return, and how they embodied the values of duty and service that his parents had taught him to admire. Catherine was moved by her son's advocacy for others, particularly for people whose service was often taken for granted. She had always encouraged George to think about others and to use his position to make positive differences in people's lives. Now, seeing him apply these lessons independently, she felt both proud and impressed by his growing maturity. The question was whether they could find a way to honor his request while respecting the formal structure of the event. William made a decision that reflected both his role as a father and his understanding of true leadership. He quietly spoke with the event organizers, explaining his son's observation and request. The response was immediate and positive. The staff, members organizing the ceremony, were moved by the young prince's thoughtfulness and quickly began discussing how they could incorporate recognition for the guards into the proceedings. The wheels of an impromptu plan began turning, with staff members making quick arrangements to honor George's request. Phone calls were made, additional certificates were prepared, and a new element was added to the ceremony that would surprise everyone, especially the guards who had no idea they were about to become the focus of royal appreciation. The young prince had successfully advocated for those whose service deserved recognition, demonstrating that leadership could be about noticing who might be overlooked and taking action to include them outside the ceremony hall. Sergeant Mitchell continued his vigilant watch, unaware of the discussions taking place inside. The afternoon sun had shifted, creating new patterns of light and shadow across the castle grounds. His feet had begun to ache slightly, a familiar discomfort that came with standing at attention for extended periods, but his posture remained perfect. His expression steady and professional. James had missed many family gatherings over the years due to his guard duties. Christmas mornings when his children were young, birthday parties, school plays, all sacrificed for the honor of serving the royal family. His wife, Margaret, had been understanding, but he knew she sometimes felt like a single parent when he was on extended duty rotations. His children, now grown with families of their own, had learned to plan celebrations around his schedule, always proud of their father's service, but sometimes wishing he could be more present in their daily lives. The weight of these sacrifices had grown heavier as James aged. While he had never regretted his choice to become a royal guard, there were moments of quiet reflection when he wondered if his service had been noticed or appreciated beyond the basic requirements of his job. He took pride in his work, but like many dedicated employees, he sometimes felt invisible, valued for his function but not recognized as an individual with his own story and struggles. Inside the castle, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Word of Prince George's request had spread through the staff, creating an unusual buzz of excitement. The event organizers were working quickly to modify the ceremony, while maintaining the dignity and formality that such occasions required. Additional staff members were discreetly contacted to help coordinate what was about to become a very special recognition. The head of palace security received a call that initially confused him. He was asked to prepare a list of the guards currently on duty, along with their years of service and any notable commendations they had received. When he learned the reason for this request, he was both surprised and deeply moved. In his many years of coordinating security for royal events, he had never seen anything quite like what Prince George was proposing. As preparations continued inside, George became increasingly excited about what was about to happen. His parents watched with amazement as their son demonstrated a level of thoughtfulness and initiative that exceeded their expectations. The young prince had not only identified an oversight in their recognition practices, but had also taken steps to correct it, showing leadership qualities that would serve him well in his future role. The ceremony was about to resume when a palace aide approached Sergeant Mitchell at his post. The aide's expression was formal but carried a hint of something unusual, perhaps excitement or anticipation. James was informed that he was needed inside for a brief moment, and that another guard would temporarily take his position. This type of interruption was highly unusual, and James felt a flutter of concern as he wondered if something had gone wrong. Following the aide through corridors, he had walked countless times during his service. James tried to imagine what could require his presence inside during an active duty shift. His mind ran through various possibilities, none of them particularly reassuring. Had there been a security breach? Was there a problem with one of the other guards? The formal atmosphere of his escort suggested something serious, though the aide's demeanor seemed more excited than worried. As they approached the ceremony hall, James could hear the sound of voices and polite applause from within. The aide paused before opening the door, turning to James with what might have been a smile. The sergeant straightened his already perfect posture, preparing for whatever awaited him on the other side of the door. His years of training had prepared him for many situations, but nothing had prepared him for what was about to unfold. The door opened, and James stepped into a scene that would be etched in his memory forever. The ceremony hall was full of people, all turning to look at him as he entered. In the front row, he could see the royal family, with Prince George looking directly at him with an expression of earnest anticipation. The young prince had initiated something that would transform this ordinary day into one of the most meaningful moments of James's entire career. Though the full impact of what was happening had yet to become clear to the veteran guard, the moment Sergeant Mitchell stepped into the ceremony hall, a hush fell over the gathering. His red ceremonial uniform seemed even more striking under the warm lights of the chandeliers, and his dignified bearing commanded immediate respect from everyone present. James felt acutely aware of all the eyes upon him. Uncertain why he had been brought inside during what appeared to be a formal recognition ceremony for palace staff, Prince William stood up from his seat in the front row, his expression warm and welcoming. The future king's presence added gravity to the moment, but it was the look of eager anticipation on Prince George's face that caught James's attention. The young prince was practically vibrating with excitement, clearly anticipating something wonderful that was about to happen. The scene felt surreal to James, who was accustomed to being a silent observer rather than the focus of royal attention. Catherine also rose, her gentle smile offering reassurance to the obviously confused guard. She had been moved by her son's initiative and was proud to be part of recognizing someone whose service had been quietly exemplary for so many years. The entire royal family's involvement in this impromptu ceremony elevated its significance far beyond a simple staff appreciation event. William began to speak, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. He explained that they were gathered to honor long-serving staff members, but that an important oversight had been brought to their attention by Prince George. The young Prince William had observed the dedicated service of the royal guards and felt strongly that their years of faithful duty deserved recognition alongside the other staff members being honored that day. James felt his chest tighten with emotion as he began to understand what was happening. In all his years of service, he had never expected to be singled out for individual recognition. The ceremony had always been about doing his duty quietly and professionally, never seeking attention or acknowledgement. The idea that Prince George had specifically noticed his service and advocated for this moment felt almost overwhelming. The young prince stood up next to his father, his small stature contrasting with his mature words as he began to speak. George explained that he had been watching the guards during his visits to royal residences and had been impressed by their dedication. He mentioned how they stood for hours protecting everyone inside, often in difficult weather conditions, and how they maintained their dignity even when dealing with crowds of tourists or difficult situations. Prince George's words were simple but profound. He spoke about noticing how the guards' eyes were always alert, how they treated everyone with respect, and how they embodied the values of service and duty that his parents had taught him were important. The young prince's observation that the guards deserved recognition for their years of faithful service resonated throughout the hall, touching not just James but everyone present. As George continued speaking, James felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. The young prince's words validated decades of service that had often felt invisible. All the missed family dinners, the hours standing in rain and snow, the physical discomfort, and the personal sacrifices suddenly felt acknowledged and appreciated. To hear these sentiments expressed by a member of the royal family, particularly by someone so young who had taken the initiative to ensure this recognition happened, was deeply moving. The ceremony organizers had quickly prepared a special certificate recognizing James's 20 years of service as a royal guard. Prince George was invited to present it, and the young prince approached with a maturity that impressed everyone watching. As he handed the certificate to Sergeant Mitchell, Prince George looked directly into the guard's eyes and thanked him for his years of dedicated service to the royal family. James accepted the certificate with hands that trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the unexpected honor and the genuine appreciation being shown by the royal family. The applause from the assembled staff members was warm and sustained, reflecting their recognition of a colleague whose service had been exemplary but often unnoticed. In that moment, James felt a validation that transcended the formal acknowledgement. He felt truly seen and appreciated for who he was as a person, not just for his function as a guard. The impact of Prince George's gesture extended far beyond the simple presentation of a certificate. The young prince had demonstrated that true leadership involves noticing those who serve quietly and taking action to ensure they feel valued. For James, this moment represented the culmination of a career spent in dedicated service, finally receiving the recognition that made all the sacrifices feel worthwhile. As the applause died down, Sergeant Mitchell found himself struggling to maintain the professional composure that had defined his career. The certificate in his hands seemed to weigh more than any piece of paper should, carrying with it the acknowledgement of decades of faithful service. His voice caught slightly as he managed to express his gratitude to Prince George and the royal family for this unexpected honor. The young prince, however, was not finished. With a maturity that continued to surprise the adults around him, George asked if there were other guards on duty who also deserved recognition. His question prompted immediate action from the ceremony organizers, who quickly arranged for the other guards to be temporarily relieved of their posts so they could join James in the ceremony hall. Within minutes, 3 more guards entered, their expressions showing the same confusion and growing amazement that James had experienced. Prince George insisted on personally thanking each guard, taking time to ask about their years of service and expressing genuine interest in their experiences. The young prince's natural ability to connect with people, combined with his obvious sincerity, created an atmosphere of warmth and appreciation that touched everyone present. Each guard received a certificate of recognition, but more importantly, they experienced a moment of personal acknowledgement that validated their years of dedication. William and Catherine watched their son with obvious pride, recognizing that his actions reflected the values they had tried to instill while also demonstrating an independent thoughtfulness that exceeded their expectations. The way George interacted with the guards showed his growing understanding of leadership as service to others, rather than simply receiving service from them. His parents exchanged glances that conveyed their amazement at their son's initiative and emotional intelligence. The ceremony took on an even more special significance as word spread throughout the castle about what Prince George had initiated. Kitchen staff, housekeepers, and administrative workers who had already received their recognition earlier in the ceremony seemed genuinely moved by the inclusion of the guards. Many approached the guards afterward to congratulate them, creating an atmosphere of camaraderie and mutual respect that elevated the entire event. For James, the moments following the certificate presentation were almost as meaningful as the recognition itself. Fellow staff members who had worked alongside him for years approached to shake his hand and express their own appreciation for his service. Colleagues shared stories of times when James had gone above and beyond his duties, helping with security during special events or simply being a steady, reliable presence that everyone could count on. The head of palace security, who had initially been surprised by the request to include the guards in the ceremony, found himself deeply moved by the entire experience. He realized that in the daily management of security operations, the personal sacrifices and dedication of individual guards sometimes became overshadowed by operational concerns. Prince George's initiative had reminded everyone of the human element behind the professional duties. As the ceremony concluded, James felt a profound shift in his perspective on his career and his service. The recognition had not changed the fundamental nature of his work, but it had transformed his understanding of its value and impact. The young prince's gesture had shown him that his service mattered not just as a function, but as a contribution made by a real person whose dedication was noticed and appreciated. The conversation that followed between Prince George and Sergeant Mitchell was brief but meaningful. The young prince asked James about his family and his experiences as a guard, showing genuine curiosity about the person behind the uniform. James found himself sharing stories he had never told before, speaking about the pride he took in his service and the honor he felt in protecting the royal family. As the guards prepared to return to their posts, James realized that this day would forever change how he approached his duties. The recognition he had received would carry him through future long shifts and difficult moments, serving as a reminder that his service was valued and his dedication recognized. Prince George's subtle but impactful gesture had given new meaning to a career that James had always taken pride in, but now felt truly appreciated for. The young prince had demonstrated that leadership could be exercised through acts of recognition and inclusion, showing that even small gestures could have profound impacts on the lives of those who serve faithfully in supporting roles. Months after the ceremony, the impact of Prince George's gesture continued to resonate throughout the royal household and beyond. Sergeant Mitchell had returned to his duties with renewed purpose and energy, but the nature of his service had fundamentally changed. The recognition he had received had not only validated his past contributions, but had also inspired him to approach his role with even greater dedication and pride. James began sharing his experience with younger guards, mentoring them about the importance of their service and helping them understand that their work had meaning beyond the daily routines of standing watch. The certificate from Prince George hung proudly in his home, but more importantly, the memory of that day served as a constant reminder that his service mattered to the people he protected and to the institution he represented. The story of Prince George's initiative spread throughout the Royal Protection Services and became a defining example of leadership through recognition and inclusion. Other royal residences began implementing similar recognition programs for their security staff, understanding that acknowledging the personal sacrifices and dedication of guards was not just good practice, but essential for maintaining the high standards of service that royal protection required. For Prince George, the experience became a foundational moment in his development as a future leader. His parents continued to reference the ceremony when teaching him about the responsibilities that would one day be his. using it as an example of how leadership could be expressed through attention to others and advocacy for those whose service might otherwise go unnoticed. The young prince had learned that his position gave him the power to make a positive difference in people's lives. Even through seemingly small gestures, the broader royal staff took notice of how Prince George had handled the situation, recognizing in the young prince qualities that suggested he would one day be a compassionate and thoughtful leader. His ability to observe, empathize, and take action demonstrated emotional intelligence that impressed even the most experienced members of the royal household. The incident became part of the stories that staff members shared about the royal family's character and values. As James approached his retirement after more than 2 decades off service, he reflected on how Prince George's recognition had transformed the final years of his career.